Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, President Biden agrees to send more liquefied natural gas to reduce Europe's dependence on Russia. And the president calls for Russia to be expelled from the G20. And Southwest Airlines is launching a new type of ticket to lure you back into the air. We have that and more on this Friday, March the 25th, 2022. Hi, I'm Andre Laborde. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. I hope your week went well. Last month's February's pending new home sales dropped 4.1% for the month. Now, that's the fourth straight monthly drop as interest rates on the 30-year mortgage continue to rise. Now, today, the 30-year mortgage rate average rose to just under 5% to 4.95. That's up 10% in just 1 week alone, and it's up 51% since January the 1st. As the Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates, the cost of a 30-year mortgage will also be rising, and these rates to buy a home, well, they become more expensive, and the desire to buy a new home decreases. And the median cost of a new home increased over 10.5% to now just over $400,000 for an average house. Southwest Airlines is wanting to lure you back into the skies. Southwest is launching a new type of ticket with some additional perks that look to boost revenue and hopefully appeal to travelers at the same time. This type of fare will be priced above their lowest fare and below their higher price tiers. The features include the option to cancel flights and also give the credit to a friend, a family member, or anyone you may desire, or me. This is Southwest Airlines' first new offering since 2007. And coming up tonight, we have the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers. Mike served for 14 years in the House of Representatives. He represented Michigan's 8th District. Besides being chairman of the Intelligence Committee, he was also a former special agent with the FBI. We'll be discussing the Russian invasion of Ukraine, China's expansion in the Pacific, and Iran's desire for a nuclear bomb. We'll be talking with former Congressman Mike Rogers in just a minute. But first, how did the markets do this week? Well, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ all closed higher for the second straight week. This week, the Dow Jones ended at 34,861, which was up 0.3% for the week. And the S&P 500, they closed at 4,543. That was up almost 1.8% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they ended at 14,169, up just short of 2% for the week. Energy was the top-performing S&P sector of the week. So, well, let's get to our guest this evening. Mike Rogers, he served 14 years in Congress, representing Michigan's 8th District. He was chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. And best of all, he's here with us tonight. Hi, Mike. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Mike, just recently, a group of U.S. senators, bipartisan, went to Poland to personally review to see what was going on as far as U.S. involvement of weapons and what can be done for the Ukrainian invasion. And they said that more could be done. But what are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just the money. And by the way, Putin may have done something that we've been trying to do in this country for decades, is get, Republicans and Democrats to agree on anything.
True.
If he got the Germans back into the idea that they have to be big supporters of NATO and make sure they can defend themselves, and he got Republicans and Democrats to agree that we need to do more. And here's what we aren't doing. So there's two different things. There's getting the money. Congress did that in a bipartisan way. But actually executing and getting the weapon systems that Ukrainians need to defend themselves, that is a whole nother kettle of fish, and they're just not doing well. We have the capability, we have the equipment, it's not showing up where it needs to show up. This is a huge problem.
Mike, do you think that there's I guess for lack of a better word, a paralysis, that where the Biden administration does not want to irritate, aggravate Vladimir Putin, and they're going above and beyond not to antagonize him, but by doing so, this only Do you feel that would this actually emboldens Vladimir Putin?
Oh, I absolutely do. He understands strength. And listen, we've almost shot ourselves in the foot here by saying, well, if we give planes, we think that's an escalation. Why you would even have that conversation publicly is beyond me. Now it means that if we give the MiGs, Putin gets to say, well, that's an escalation. I get to do more bad things to more people. So, I mean, horribly mishandled. Secondly, we've been talking about getting these weapon systems in. My argument is, we'll do it. He's already factored that in. He being Putin has factored that into his decision making. Do it. What he is now looking at is this horrific hand wringing about, well, do I give 1,000 missiles or 5,000 missiles? We shouldn't even have those conversations. Those conversations ought to be, we're going to give them everything they need to do to defend themselves, including a no-fly zone affected from the ground. And none of this involves U.S. troops, by the way, none of it. I do think it empowers them, it emboldens them. If you see what they're doing on the Iranian deal, the Russians are saying, well, we're going to cause some problems in the nuclear deal in Iran. If sanctions impact the deal in Iran and oil coming and being purchased by Russia, we've empowered them in a way that we absolutely are hurting ourselves, our national security, and our long-term, even energy and environmental policies.
There's the S-300, which is the anti-air defense missile that the Ukrainians know how to use. And they understand these are Soviet-made, but the Biden administration is withholding, allowing the Ukrainians to have the S-300 that are already out, ready to be put into Ukraine, but they're being held up because, again, they're not wanting to antagonize Vladimir Putin.
They may get beat into submission by our own, rational thinking Congress in this, which is hard to say sometimes. But our own rational Congress is saying, you got to give them this stuff. These folks are dying. And by the way, when you may measure this if you in weeks or months. I mean, they were saying that they weren't going to get some of these sophisticated surface-to-air missiles until end of April. You can gauge the number of deaths between them. This isn't some kind of weird calculation that Putin is factoring in how angry to be. He's already angry. He's slaughtering citizens in Ukraine right today. He's bombing innocent men, women, and children in hospitals and schools because he's trying to raise the misery index in Ukraine. He wants them to crumble. He's trying to crush their morale. So when you play these games about, I'll wait 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, trust me, if we wanted to move surface to air missiles, and by the way, what the Europeans are asking is, we have them, we want to send them in, but we need backfill, meaning we don't leave us exposed to Russian jets or bombers by not having these surface to air protection systems. And so the deal here was, we'll put them into your countries. You move the Soviet-produced gear up into Ukraine that they know how to use, and they can implement their version of a no-fly zone. They've never asked for U.S. troops to be involved. They're asking for this equipment. They're slaughtering us. A shoulder-fired missile is great for helicopters, not so good for bombers and on high-altitude aircraft that they know they're having some problems with. Give them what they need. They've clearly demonstrated they're willing to fight literally to the death to defend their freedom. We ought to at least do what we say we're going to do publicly. When they give up, it just drives me crazy when they give those press conferences and say, gosh, we're going to give them everything they need. We're going to give them shoulder-fired weapon. We're going to give them those. Great. Make sure that they have all the equipment that we know they could use.
Do you think the sanctions, first off, do you think they're working? And second, do you think those sanctions should have been started prior when they were building up?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, I was calling before that, start some of the sanctions now. We know that he was conducting unconventional operations in the Donbass region. Start it for that reason and say these are going to get worse. And the day that first troop stepped over the line or that first missile went in, they should have just invoked a whole panoply of these things to just absolutely crush Putin's notion that he was going to have a free ride here. And he candidly, I think, believed he was going to have a free ride. And so, yes, they'll have a bite. Some of them take longer, but we're still implementing some. We still really didn't go after his ability to sell oil around the world. Our Indian friends bought oil from Vladimir Putin. That's a lifeline. And so we need to be very aggressive about this and say, listen, there's more we can do, and we should do it. And so, again, I do think they were slow. I mean, the fact that they've gone through this list, great. They needed to be quicker. It really needed to be a boot on his throat versus this notion that we're going to keep trying to make it hard and difficult for you. Two different conversations there. Trust me, the one he knows best is the boot on the throat.
Mike,
Yep.
that's a good point because I'm curious when it comes to the buying of Russian oil, and you were just talking about India and others. In the EU, the European Union, Germany is so dependent on this Russian oil. And there are other smaller countries like Hungary and others, but let's say a country like Germany. What should the United States do to coerce or to make sure that Germany does not buy? Do you think that sanctions should be put on Germany?
What we need to do is give them different opportunities. We need to turn on American production of natural resources here in the United States. Why we are still talking about this is beyond me. And some would say, yeah, but it takes 12 months. They can't get permits. They get permits. 12 months later, we have natural gas and oil going through the system. And that also relieves the system because we know that there's some certainty at the end of the day. All of those are pretty simple things that the administration could do today. They won't do it. They're not doing it. All of that serves to help the folks that are thinking that they have to buy Russian oil today. So we could produce more immediately. It wouldn't fix all our problems for sure. But we could also put on the future, we're going to make sure that we have the means to fill the world's needs right from oil and natural gas right here in the United States. And again, it doesn't sound like it's a near-term fix, but if people had their permits tomorrow, literally, we would have oil and gas flowing 12 months later. That's a huge, huge, huge thing, especially for the markets. That means that push downward pressure on prices in the markets. All of those things can happen. And the Germans need to be a part of those conversations for sure.
When President Biden called the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and asked him to increase production, bin Salman didn't even take his phone call. Now, I had never heard of a Saudi Arabian or anybody not taking the President of the United States phone call or just say, have him call me back. But is that what you heard?
Yes, and here this is what I mean by these policies have to be done in concert. You know, we no longer can just say we're mad at this country and we're going to do X. This is a great example. We stood up and said we're going to leave Saudi Arabia, who has been, you know, mostly an ally. Are they perfect? Nope, they are not. But they're a much better ally than Iran, I have to tell you. And Saudi Arabia was battling in Yemen, which is on their border, a group called the Houthis, it was an independent movement in Yemen, who also have been firing missiles and rockets supplied by Iran into Saudi Arabia, right? So they believe, if you're Saudi Arabia, you believe that this is an existential threat to your country, and it is. And it's all fueled by Iran. And by the way, where did they get most of that money? They got most of that money in the first Iranian deal when they freed up some $50 billion. They, being at that time, the Obama administration, gave them $50 billion. Guess what they did? They funneled it right into their proxy fights, including the Houthis, which, you know, they were starving for that cash prior to that arrangement. And so if you're Saudi Arabia, you look at that and say, well, I thought it was a terrible deal. You gave them money. Now they're giving them missiles and they're shooting at us. And you all pulled out. If you recall, it wasn't that long ago that the Biden administration said, we're done. We're not going to help you anymore. Right. And then they wonder why when they pick up the phone and say, gosh, we'd really like your help, they put you on hold for 20 minutes. That's exactly why you can't. That's what I keep trying to tell folks. This is all related. You have to be strong through the whole process and have consistency in our foreign policy if we're going to have people there when we absolutely need them, like now.
The Biden administration right now wants to restart the Iran nuclear deal that would, in theory, restrict them from creating a nuclear bomb. Well, I'm sure the Saudi Arabians and UAE and other Arab states are looking at this with which you were talking before about the Houthis, going, wait a second, Iran is funneling money to the Houthis to bomb us with drone strikes, and the United States is about to possibly lift sanctions on Iran if the Iran deal goes through with the United States.
Yeah, listen, our Arab League allies have been dumbfounded. They're basically saying, how could you do this? One of the first things that they're agreeing to, and this was the problem with the last go around, they did it in secret. And a lot of the same negotiators are senior people in the Biden administration that they're in Obama that did the negotiation. They gave them cash with no consequence, and gave them things before they had to make an agreement, meaning they gave relief on certain items before Iran did any good faith measure. And what they're talking about now is taking the Quds or the IRGC, the Republican Guard in Iran, who we know is engaged in terrorist activities around the region and around the world, and taking them off the terrorist list. And that's why the UAE, our Arab League partners, Israel, and other allies are saying, this is crazy. I can't even believe you're talking about this. And no one's paying attention because we have this conflict in Ukraine. And guess who else is sitting at that table? The Russians.
The Russians. They're the ones brokering the deal.
Are kind of brokering
They're brokering the deal.
Between,
the Russians.
This is crazy. You couldn't make this up if you tried.
If you were writing a novel, a fiction novel, you'd go, well, you're going a little bit too far. That's a little bit too out of. Yeah,
it's not
Tom Clancy wouldn't even think of this. Mike, if this deal would go through with, and I'm talking about this Iran nuclear deal, do you think this would then push countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and others for them to have a nuclear bomb, a nuclear weapon as well, because they want defense against Iran?
I will tell you a conversation I had when I was still in office during the whole first negotiation of this. It was a pretty senior Saudi official who said, if you all do this, this was the first Iran deal, we can go out and probably buy our own nuclear bomb. He was trying to send a message. He was being very clear. But think about it. If your enemy that has sworn you to death and is now doing proxy fights to try to kill you, and Iran attacked the oil producing capability in Saudi Arabia early on. It's a company called Saudi Aramco. They almost shut it down, and it cost them, money and resources. It was really had an impact on international markets. This was about 15 or 18 years ago. And so, if you think about that, and you see the United States is not helping you and is pulled away, that you think if they're going to get a bomb, I better have one too, right? Mutually assured destruction, and that's what we always feared with this. The way the deal was done, and the way they want this deal so badly, they being the Biden administration wants this deal so badly, they're willing to give up things that most people would say, I don't get it. Iran needs you more than you need them. Why in God's green earth would you give them all of these goodies to get them to do what they shouldn't do in the first place? Because if they get what they want and they get this deal, many believe that the runway for Iran to get a nuclear bomb is under a year, meaning they've already done the hard things. There's 3 parts of a program: missiles, actually figuring out how to form and shape nuclear material at the top of the missile, and then targeting, right? So, and they've got 2 of the 3 are already done, we know. And so they're thinking, gosh, wouldn't take much if they decided, well, I'll get all this good stuff and I'm going to keep going until they get to keep enriched uranium, by the way, is what the conversations are. Enriched uranium is the dangerous stuff. That's what you make weapons out of. And it just, none of this makes sense. If I were Saudi Arabia, I'm not sure I'd be very happy with us now either. And so that policy, those negotiations, walking away from their fight with the Houthis, is exactly why they said, Mr. President of the United States, I'll put you on hold and maybe I can get you a deputy assistant to an assistant to talk to you in the very near future.
If you're just joining us right now, we're talking with former Representative Congressman Mike Rogers, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. We're going to take a break, but we'll be right back. If you're joining us just now, we're very happy to have you. We're talking with former Congressman Mike Rogers, former chairman of the House Intel Committee. Mike, before we left for a break, we were just talking about in Saudi Arabia with their possibility of wanting to get a bomb as well too, and that makes me wonder also now about other countries. And I'm thinking of China. Just recently, Joe Biden had a conversation with Xi Jinping of China, and under normal circumstances, to my understanding, is that there's always a release of a briefing, maybe not of the exact word-for-word transcript, but of what happened in the call. China immediately put theirs out. They got theirs before the Biden administration did, and the only thing that I saw was Jen Psaki, who is the president's spokeswoman, said that everything China said was not true. Now, which makes me wonder to believe, did the call go very well?
I'm going to guess it hasn't. So if you think about where the Chinese are, and this is why the Ukraine issue and watching how Putin has kind of rolled over, democracy and freedom. He took Crimea, and this gets back to the Chinese question. I promise you, he took Crimea. He's invaded the country of Georgia. He has 2 provinces there. He's been very active in Syria, and that's gone well for him. He has two republics in Crimea. He's held them for several years, solidified that. He's thinking the more I'm doing and the less consequences I have from the world, this is working to my favor. China has watched all of that. And remember, they went into Hong Kong, and the world just yawned. They took over a free nation that existed under British rule for a long time, and then under Chinese rule, and it just basically disappeared. They went in and arrested the press. They arrested the Communist Party of China, and now they're talking about Taiwan.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point, because they were supposed to have 50 years of independence for Hong Kong, which only turned out to be, 5 or 6. Because the way the world has reacted against Ukraine, against Russia in their invasion of Ukraine, does this hinder possibly China going into Taiwan, or is Xi Jinping thinking, I may not have a better chance than right now with the Biden administration? Let me do it now, because no one knows what's going to be coming up in future administrations.
I think that China will likely try to do what they did in Hong Kong. It's really hard. They have the capability to put Marines on a watercraft and travel around the strait and land in Taiwan, but it's very difficult. Weather screws that up. They would have to, all the conditions would have to be right. And China knows that. So I think they're going to take the slow burn to Taiwan, but continue to put pressure on it. But what they see is when you wring your hands on decisions like, hey, could you please give me surface-to-air missiles to protect the civilians of my population, and we'll say, ooh, we'll kind of get around to it. It might get there in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Check is in the mail. Guess what? That sends a very clear message to people who don't think the same way we are. If you can't make a decision to do that, and the whole region is saying, give it to us, guess what? That means I'm going to be a little more provocative than I might normally be.
One day this will be over. And our hope is that possibly Putin will withdraw his forces and go back into Russia, depending on what the scenarios will be. If he retreats and goes back into Russia, should we keep the sanctions on until Putin is no longer the leader of Russia? Or should we go ahead and lift the sanctions if he pulls out? And to me, it's sort of like, is that rewarding bad behavior?
And so I wouldn't say today there's a yes or no answer. I don't think it's binary. I think you give a plan for Russia to come off of sanctions, and it means they have to meet certain criteria. So I think what you want to do is set up a plan, say, this isn't going to go anywhere soon, Mr. Putin. Your life is going to be pretty miserable. Your oligarchs may be the last ones who are sanction-free, but we might do some things for humanitarian purposes and other things. And then, again, I would evaluate it every week, every month, every year to make sure that we don't give them something that makes their life easier and rewards bad behavior.
You talk to a lot of leaders around the world. Do you think, do our allies respect us, and do our enemies fear us?
Right now, I think they're just confused. So remember, I would count Saudi Arabia was an ally. I'm sure they're not very happy with us and don't respect us right now, if you look at it that way. When the polls say they have airplanes and we're going to give them and we're ready to take this risk, and all we got to do is get them across the border so Ukrainians can fly them, and we say yes, and then we say no, it's pretty hard to respect us for something like that. These things matter.
Sure.
And so I do think it erodes the confidence in this leadership of the United States. You can't just say that we're the leaders of the free world. We have to act like it.
Please come back.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mike. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it pithy, make it concise, and write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. And now for a look ahead for next week. But first, what new way of consumer spending occurred on this day, March 25th, in 1966? We'll have the answer in just a moment. Well, what new way of consumer spending occurred on this day, March 25th in 1966? The Visa card. California's Bank of America executive Ken Larkin proposed that the bank should offer a credit card service and do it nationwide. See, Bank of America was originally just in California, but it was on this day. President Biden in Brussels this week with NATO leaders agreed to send liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to Europe to help wean their dependence off Russian oil and gas. Now, we've been exporting LNG to Europe, but we'll be increasing this amount, which is measured in billion cubic meters. Last year, we exported over 22 billion cubic meters to Europe, and that is going to be rising throughout this year. And the U.S. government has since 2020 has shelled out about $6 trillion in COVID relief money since the pandemic began. Well, as of this date, of $165 billion has been so far found to be spent fraudulently on people who were not employed or had the wrong names. Some of that $165 billion in benefits even went to those living outside of the United States, in China, in Mexico, and other foreign countries. But not all of them were just off-the-street criminals. It turns out that we found out that $12 million in pandemic relief money went to renovate a minor league ballpark in New York. $6 million went for golf courses in Colorado. $2.5 million of COVID relief went to Washington, D.C. to hire more parking ticket officers. $1 million went to St. Louis, Missouri, and was used to pay off back child support. And probably, the best was a $5 million COVID relief that went for korfball in Alabama. Now you say, what is korfball, you might ask? Korfball is played by two teams consisting of players each with 4 males and 4 females on each team, 8 altogether on each team. Now the object is to throw a ball into a netless basket that's mounted on a high pole. $5 million. Think how expensive it would have been if they had to buy a net. Well, next week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, we're going to be talking with the former ambassador to the United Nations, Thomas Pickering. Ambassador Pickering, in addition to being ambassador to the UN, he was also former ambassador to Russia, Israel, India, Nigeria, and to Jordan. That's next week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, former UN ambassador Thomas Pickering. And as a reminder, we repeat the show on Sunday mornings. But you know what? The best way? Always to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that is our show for this Friday, March the 25th, 2022. Hope you've enjoyed it. My thanks to Mike Rogers for joining us this evening. But always, it's you. It's you we appreciate for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, you can always follow us on all the social media on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and WYES.org. So enjoy your weekend ahead. Have a productive week as well. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap-Up, I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.